tutorial, we're going to take a look at how to draw a mouth using colored pencils. And in this case, the mouth is going to be slowly opened, so we're going to be able to see some of the teeth as well. We're going to be using Prismacolor colored pencils, and I'm working on gray toned paper for this demonstration. I'll begin by drawing the inside portion of the upper lip first using a light brown colored pencil. I'll do the same for the upper portion of the bottom lip, and then I'll go ahead and lightly draw the outlines for the rest of the lips, as well as begin to define some of the shapes for the teeth. Now at this stage in the drawing, I'm making very light marks, and I'm just using this light brown to basically plan out where the different shapes of the objects are going to be in my drawing. Once I've defined the lips and the teeth with some contour lines, I'll begin to add some of the local color that exists. In this case, I'm going to begin with a red colored pencil, and I'm going to start adding that color using cross contour lines. In other words, I'm going to look at the form of the lips, and I'm going to make my lines follow the direction of the form of the lips, instead of just making them go horizontal or vertical. There is a slight bit of a curve that I need to add as I'm adding the red to the surface. Now, as I look at the lips, I'll notice that some of the areas are a little bit darker than some of the other areas. So I'll put a little bit more pressure on the pencil as I begin to add the red, and those areas are naturally going to begin to be a little bit darker. I'll continue to work my way all the way around the lips, keeping in mind that the upper lip is more than likely going to be darker than the bottom lip. Light usually comes from above, and since our lips stick out, the top lip is usually darker in value, so it's going to have a little bit more of the red material on the surface to begin with. Once I've established a lot of the red on the surface, I'll begin to add some of the other colors that I see within the lips. In this case, I'm going to start with light pink, and I'm going to go all the way around the edges of the lips, including the bottom portions of the lips. There are still some areas I'm going to leave alone because in my photo reference, I see that there's some areas of really strong highlight, and I'm going to address those with white a little later on in the drawing. Once I've established some areas of pink and red, I can now go back with white and begin to add some of the areas of highlight. I'll do this early in the drawing because I want the white to be pretty strong in some areas. In fact, in some areas of the lips, it's completely white, and I want this reflection to look realistic, so the white needs to be really strong in these areas. Then I'll go back with my red again, and I'll start to define some of the areas a little bit further. And what's going to happen is as I'm adding the material to the surface at this stage in the drawing, some of the colors are going to begin to mix a little bit together. And when this happens, the wax will build up on the surface, and you can begin to burnish some areas. And you can see this taking place here with the white that I'm adding at this moment. So I'll just continue to go back and forth between the reds and the white and the pink and build up the tonalities that I see in my photo reference. Now, if your goal is to create a representational or a realistic drawing with colored pencils, then you really want to build up the pencils so that they appear heavily applied. Now, each time I'm adding colored pencil, I'm not necessarily pushing really hard and building up a heavy application, but layer after layer builds upon itself, and eventually it will be heavily applied to the surface. In fact, when done correctly, a colored pencil drawing may even resemble a painting. Now at this point, I'm adding a little bit of dark brown to the surface, and I'm doing this to create a shadowed area around the corners of the lips and just underneath the lips. Now the reason I'm using brown instead of black is because I want to create more of a natural shadow, and I'm going to rely on the brown and blue to do so instead of the black. Red is a warm color, so I'm using brown to make the value a bit darker. Once I've applied the brown, I'll go back over the top of it with red to make the value darker. Now I'll continue down on the bottom lips. And remember, our bottom lip is typically going to be lighter in value. So you can already see this beginning to develop here in the drawing. This means I'm going to be using quite a bit of white on the bottom to create some of the highlights that happen on the bottom portion of the lip. Just like I did with the brown to make the value darker, I'll add areas of white first, and then I'll go over the top of it with red. When I'm adding the highlights here on the bottom, I am putting quite a bit of pressure on the pencil. I want as much of the material to transfer to the surface here because I want the white to be very intense and I want the lips to have somewhat of a look of being wet. Once I've got a good amount of color and a good layer buildup on the lips, I'm going to go back with a colorless blender. Now, a colorless blender is basically just the wax material that you find in colored pencils, just without the pigment. So this allows me to basically blend the colors on the surface. And by doing so, I'm taking some of the lines out of it and making the lips look a bit more natural. Once the lips are finished, I can go ahead and start to define some of the dark areas that exist on the inside portions of the mouth. Now here again, I'm not using a black, so I'll start with a dark brown, and then I'll go over the top of it with a dark blue. Now that's too blue, so I'll go back with the dark brown, and the result will be a more natural looking black. Black tends to make drawings look flat, so I'm going to try to avoid black altogether in this colored pencil drawing. I'm also going to use the dark brown to create some of the shadowed areas that exist between the teeth, and I'm going to put a thin layer of shadow on some of the teeth as well. Our first impulse might be just to color the teeth white, but on closer inspection you'll notice that there are shadows and highlights that exist in the teeth, just like on any other surface. When I go over the top of the areas that I've already put a light application of shadow on and I mix it with the white, it creates kind of a dull gray, which is what I'm after here on the teeth. I'll also add a bit of cream here in the corners of some of the teeth just to make the teeth look a little bit more natural. Then if I need to make my shadows just a bit stronger, I can do so by going over the areas that I've already applied white. Next, I'm going to define some of the colors that exist for the tongue that's right behind the teeth. Since I've already put a light layer of brown behind it, I can just go right on the top of it with red and it will create a darker value of red, which is what I'm after. On the left side of the drawing, the tongue has some light hitting it, so it's going to be lighter in value and it has a couple areas of highlight as well. I can add the finishing touches to the teeth so that they look like they recede in the mouth by adding some darker value. And then with just a couple more touches, our drawing is complete. You can go ahead and finish the skin tone around the lips to even add to the realism even further. Just remember, with colored pencils, you want to build up the colors so that they look heavily applied.